We've all heard many times that we're losing jobs to trade, and when economists note these losses, they're quick to claim that new and higher paying jobs will be available in high tech to replace those lost jobs. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about how trade has impacted both the high tech profession in general as well as my personal career. And let me start with a little background info about myself and the tech industry. I have over 25 years of experience as a software engineer. I have a Master's of Science in Software Design and Development. I develop software to run on the world's most popular operating system, Microsoft Windows. Perhaps you've heard of it. I have extensive experience with C++, a software language used to produce the vast majority of today's high-performance software. And I have experience in various fields, including healthcare, insurance, education, gaming, and above all, manufacturing. And I'm not telling you this tonight to brag, but rather to set the stage that my experiences that you'll be hearing are that of somebody already working at the upper end of the industry. So let me talk a little bit about High Tech 101. You'd be hard-pressed today to find an industry that doesn't use computers. For example, today even farming equipment is now equipped with GPS and fertilizer tracking systems. Because of this pervasive use of high tech, you will find high tech in just about every industry. However, with all the progress that's been made in high tech, it might surprise you to know that no one is tracking unemployment numbers for worker occupations. Unemployment is only tracked on an industry basis. For example, a janitor who's working at Intel is considered a high-tech worker. And a computer network administrator at a hospital is a healthcare worker. It's also important to note that there's many different categories of workers in high tech. High tech has the usual division of employees and contractors, like most industries, but we also have a large number of foreign workers working here on visas. And there's many types of visas. One type of visa is the H-1B visa, which was originally designed for people with special skills that could not be obtained domestically. And the original users of this were fashion models, people like Rachel Hunter from New Zealand, who couldn't be replaced with somebody locally because she's special and can't just be replaced. Many of you probably have already heard of the H-1B, but there's also a lesser-known L-1 visa. And the L-1's been growing in popularity. The L-1 was designed to be used by foreign companies to place employees into the U.S. for the purpose of starting up the presence, foreign companies' presence here. And it has the advantage that there's no cap on these visas and that the wages are not subject to U.S. or state minimum wage laws. The largest user of both of these visas, both the H-1B and the L-1, are not U.S. companies looking to hire talent. The largest user is foreign temp agencies placing contractors here in the U.S. And with that background, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my previous job at a company called IGT. IGT is a Nevada-based company that is the largest manufacturer of slot machines in the world. IGT purchased a company called Acres Gaming, based in Corvallis, Oregon, in order to acquire what was known as their bonus pool technology. A slot machine bonus pool is a way for large jackpots in a casino to accumulate across a network of slot machines. I started at IGT in August of 2008, and I was earning a very good salary of $90K per year. After being unemployed for 3 out of the previous 6 years, a $90,000 per year job was not something I could just pass up. However, to do so, I had to move away from my family, my friends, and my home. After 4 months on this job, in December of 2008, IGT announced it was opening a new office in Beijing, China. We were told this was done because IGT couldn't find qualified people in the U.S., and that's a quote, despite the fact that we were in the midst of the largest economic downturn since the Great Depression. I was assigned a new manager to my group, and before I even spoke with him about what my current tasks were, he told me, and I'll quote, "Give every task you can to the Chinese." The company began bringing newly hired Chinese employees over in pairs for a month at a time to be trained in the U.S. Then they were sent back to China and a new pair was brought over. In addition, the more experienced IGT employees, and I was not one of them, were sent to China to train them in Beijing. The number of Chinese employees eventually grew to 2 Chinese workers for every U.S. worker we had. In December of 2009, an accidental, some question whether it was accidental, leak occurred at IGT, and it was disclosed that they were going to be closing the Corvallis plant. At the official announcement of the closure, we asked if our jobs were being moved to China, and we were told flat out no. Jobs were not being sent overseas. This was not offshoring. It was simply a consolidation of offices. We were told that if anyone wanted to keep their job, they simply had to move to Las Vegas. When pressed, they said that they said there would be an additional 50 new openings in the China office, but no new jobs in Nevada. The VP then proceeded to tell us, and I don't know why he said this is good for all of us, and by that I mean it's good for you, and it's good for me, everyone here. Later, when the management saw how many people wanted to make the move to Las Vegas, they retracted their offer and said only 7 people could stay out of the 57 total Corvallis employees. And 3 of those were going to be the 3 managers at the plant. However, we did have a handful of L1 visas, which I mentioned earlier, and they were contract software programmers from India. Some of these contractors were kept, but they were sent to China, and their rate was dropped from $7 an hour to $3 an hour. In the end, we filed for trade adjustment assistance to obtain retraining money from the U.S. Department of Labor, and they agreed that our jobs were indeed offshored and that we qualified for retraining funds. But it's important to note that the cost of this retraining is being paid by taxes, and none of it is coming from IGT. So, to continue, I have to talk a little bit about trade theory. And for those who don't know these terms, you'll get to hear them. For those who do know these terms, you'll just bear with me a moment. But I'd like to talk about 2 economic terms, absolute advantage and comparative advantage. And to do that tonight, I guess I need 2 victims. And I know Arthur asked me to speak tonight, so I'm going to pick him as one of my victims. And Barbara's smiling at me, so she'll be my second.
Such punishment.
Yes, and I have bad news for the I have bad news for the both of you. You've both been shipwrecked on a desert island.
Sounds
Okay?
good, actually.
Well, maybe it is. And this island, just to be clear, it has no phone, no lights, no motor car, not a single luxury. One might even say it's as primitive as can be. So, let's say there's only 2 jobs in this island. The first is fishing, which is the only source of protein available. And let's say, Barbara, you're twice as good at fishing as Arthur. Okay?
Right.
This would mean that Barbara has what's known as an absolute advantage at fishing. And the second job on any good island is coconut gathering. You get that? Okay. However, when it comes to the coconut gathering business, sorry to tell you, Arthur, Barbara's also better. But she's not just twice as good. She's 3 times as good. She's winning at everything. And this means that Barbara, well, this does mean that Barbara does have an absolute advantage at fishing. This means that Barbara does have an absolute advantage at fishing. Arthur has the comparative advantage at fishing because he's less bad at it. So that's the difference between the 2. Hopefully that's clear. And if you're willing to do a little bit of math, which we're not going to do tonight, it'll be clear that if Arthur spends all his time fishing and Barbara spends her entire time gathering coconuts, and she's 3 times better at it, and they're willing to do trading, then they'll both do better than if they each just did both jobs. And that's the basis of what free trade's about. What's important to note here is that even though Barbara is better at fishing than Arthur, and even though she hates climbing trees and loves fishing, if economics is the only consideration, then Barbara is never going to be fishing. Sorry. It's a simple story, but likewise, free trade theory predicts that even if the U.S. has a strong absolute advantage in high-tech over Korea, we would not keep those high-tech jobs without having a comparative advantage. And they're a big difference. And this is regardless of how much you would be preferring to do this high-tech work. It makes no difference, not if that's the decision. So according to the theory, if free trade is to work, the following has to be true. Retraining has no costs. It's just as easy to switch between those two jobs. There has to be zero cost to the transportation of the goods that are being produced. We have to disallow the movement of production across the borders, and we have to limit an individual's ability to choose a career. Those are given. But in addition, companies are not valuing families and communities when moving offshore. So I can tell you, nobody at the company cared about closing down the facility. The retraining costs, as I mentioned, are not being paid by the companies. It's being borne by taxpayers. And further, workers are losing valuable skills, and in many cases, those skills take decades to obtain. Korea is a modern country with a highly educated and very technologically savvy workforce. While it may be possible we have an absolute advantage, there's no reason to think we have any sort of a comparative advantage over Korea. Therefore, it's reasonable to expect the Korean Free Trade Agreement will not move a single high-tech job to Oregon. And now that the Supreme Court, in conclusion, now that the Supreme Court has decided that corporations have the same rights of people, I've been thinking to myself, if corporations are people, then why are corporations free to move across borders to reduce their costs, while workers are not free to move across borders for better wages?